Hello everyone. My name is Evan Kim.
My name is William Estrada.
And I am Joanna.
Today we're going to be talking about Children of Blood and Bone, and the first question that we're going to answer is what we think children's literature is. What do you guys think?
To me personally, I believe that children's literature somehow teaches or shows like different experiences and possibilities in a child's life or in like a child's relationship with someone. It also kind of like reflects the development of a child in certain situations and allows the child to get a better understanding within that literature and something that they might have a question to or might be impacted by.
Yeah, I agree
So
with.
that's
Yeah, sorry.
this
Go
is
ahead.
sorry. Do
Go ahead.
you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel like children reading books, um, especially immersive books, can feel like they have experienced it even though they haven't, like personally, and I think gaining those experiences is something that is invaluable. What were you gonna say, William?
I agree with that too. I think children's literature should be relatable to the child. Like, it should actually resonate with them and reflect any problems or happy moments they're going through, because that's for healthy development. And I believe that the purpose of children's literature is to not only educate the readers but to also teach a moral lesson. We have actually seen this in numerous works of children's literature, and we have also seen it in classic fairy tales that have been historically used to entertain children, like The Tortoise and the Hare. And the moral lesson of that one is slow and steady wins the race. So it teaches that patience is a virtue, that patience is a good thing. And there's also the one called Little Red Riding Hood. That one teaches children to not trust strangers, even if they're nice, because they mask their bad intentions under a facade of kindness. And in fact, there's uh there's a scholar author named Daniel T. Kine, and he says that children's literature teaches a moral lesson. It's in other words, didactic. And Perry Nodelman, another author, points out that these are the traits of children's literature: use of simple language, focus on action rather than descriptions, use of apparent simplicity to mask hidden complexities, matter of fact tone, vocalization through a child's perspective, use of a child as a protagonist, inclusion of both child and adult characters to show both contrasting perspectives, focus on innocence and knowledge acquisition, i.e., education, as a main subject in the narrative, and the importance of home and of leaving home.
I totally agree, right, with the concept. I also had a quote where it says, like in the book, it says, "They don't hate you, my child. They hate what you're meant to become." And like you said, it gives them a broader opportunity to open up their thoughts with children's literature. It creates a scenario of a what if or like a thought, allowing them to get more thought into things. So I feel like that's a very broad concept of what it is.
Yeah, I also agree. And going off that, the second question is, in what ways does our text challenge or adhere to this purpose? So, any ideas on how children's literature and Children of Blood and Bone connect?
Oh, well, throughout the book or throughout the reading we had, I feel like it related to a lot of racism, sexism, and classism, as many as more issues that we face today. It kind of adheres to the purpose of a child's literature because it allows a child to know what's going on. Like nowadays, there's a lot of books like the How to Kill a Mockingbird that they're open to this example of racism or things that are actually happening in the current world, and it supports children's thoughts into literature.
Yeah, I agree with that because when I think of children's literature, I think of, like One Fish, Two Fish, or Dr. Seuss books.
Oh, yeah, me
And
too.
yeah, so reading this, it was definitely unexpected because, you're seeing the trauma and the pain of a teenage girl, and, it was different than what I was used to or expecting.
Yeah, I feel like when I was looking at the book, like you said, I like me personally, I was still stuck up on a book, let's say that has happy endings, or a book that's very simple at like when it comes to reading. But when you get into like deep children's literature, we can see like y- young people tend to show children's how things are done without the understanding of how or why they're done. And these children's literature book have become more open into actually letting a child know like, hey, what's happening, and like letting them understand that.
So it's basically letting them understand the complexities of the world. Like it's letting them, it's educating them in a way.
Yeah, I feel like it's allowing them to view the realistic world, but
Hmm.
not in the complexity of like, oh, like people are dying, but like sugar coated in a way. Like the
Uh,
book, it talks about like magic and about all these things that make the child believe, hey, I can make a change, or I can create a change. And I feel like that to like young minds allows them the thought of fixing these issues.
Yeah, I agree because
yeah,
like this book isn't like simplifying it for them. It's kind of just and keeping it like if they were adults, and I feel like that children want to be talked to like they were adults, or
I feel
yeah,
like
yeah. Sorry,
like
go ahead.
getting
they
the
don't want to be talked down upon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like a quote that I personally like, I loved overall of the book, was when it says, "I teach you to be warriors in the garden, so you'll never be gardeners in the war." It kind of lets them initiate a practice where like, hey, things are happening, but you're not like, oh, he's not throwing them into the pond out of nowhere, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like teaching them and showing them like, hey, these are issues, but there's also like issues you can solve. And this quote really like caught my eye just because it states like the understanding of a why, of a who, you know.
Yeah, I definitely
And
agree
that's
with
your
that.
Yeah, and that quote is
But
why you believe that Children of Blood and Bone counts as children's literature, right?
yeah, this text supports
Yeah.
my statement because it allows a sense of teaching and learning, also a way to help in their future and not to stay in the same position that has affected us. So, if we're looking at these books and they show racism, classism throughout the years, since children's literature began, like in class when we were like opening, like when it began and how it evolved, we can see that it has not fully changed, but it has affected change in a way.
Yeah. So going off that, um,
Hmm.
in what ways do you guys think this text relates to a child today?
Wait, can I state why I don't think it's children's literature first?
Um, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this book it kind of does blur the lines between what is children's literature and what is not. But as some notes that we took earlier in this class said, that the conception of a child we have today is a developing child, and for that very reason, we ought to include young adults literature as children's literature. But I personally, my opinion is that this book does not count as children's literature, and it is precisely because of the content it has inside. Like my definition is that children's literature should be simple; it shouldn't be too dark. But this book does have some pretty like complex things. Like they have to deal with numerous social issues that like kind of like intersect or cross each other at the same time. Like you have female protagonists; they're black, I believe, and this book is heavily based on West African mythology and folk tales. So there's that, and I think that children aren't old enough to understand that yet. I mean, I believe children's literature should be for people like around 5 to 12, and young adults literature should be for 13 and up. But a lot of these children aren't dealing with those issues, so they can't really relate to them or they can't really understand them. But I digress. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there is some pretty dark stuff in this book, and one example of that is a quote on page 84. That's chapter 8, and it says this: "Amari, my voice lowers. Will we have to? Will I? Thought is so wretched I can't speak. Duty before self. That's what father will say. It's what he shouted at me that fateful day. But the thought of raising my blade against Amari after all these years makes my throat dry. I can't be the king father wants me to be. I can't kill my sister. Your sister has committed treason. He speaks slowly, but it is no fault of her own. I allowed her to get close to the maggot. I should have known her simple disposition would lead her astray. So Amari can live? Or not, if she's captured before anyone discovers what she's done. That's why you can't take your men. You and Admiral Kaeya must go and recover the scroll alone. So that's pretty dark. I mean, what's his name? I forgot, but yeah, he or she, I think it's Enon or something, is thinking, is like contemplating and thinking about the horror that it would be to kill his or her sister. That's very dark, and I mean, you wouldn't see it in children's literature. So that's why I argue that it's not. Let's see, there's also this other quote on chapter 18, page 168, and it says this: "Give me," Lekhan says. "This may hurt." I inhale a sharp breath as he slashes through the palm of my hand, gritting my teeth against the sting as blood begins to seep out. Pain turns into shock when my blood glows with a white light. It drips into the water. I feel something leave me, something deeper than a simple cut. Red droplets turn the clear blue liquid white. It boils even harder as more blood falls. So as you can see, like there's more dark stuff. There's like there is shedding of blood. There's pain. There's suffering, and really wouldn't expect to see that in children's literature for people aged 5 to 12. So yeah, that's my point. Want to move on?
Uh, yeah, I would have to say that for me, I'm kind of 50-50 on whether this should be children's literature or not. On one hand, I do think this is very graphic and, children might not have the ability to understand this, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, this can also teach them that the world isn't uh, going to be all happy and lovely, and that there are problems in our world that s- are mentioned in this book. So, what do you think about this, Johanna?
Um, I feel like I can see William's point of view,
Mhm.
but we have to relate it to today's like times. You can ask, let's say, because I work with children, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's these certain childrens that I guess hear something or say something in which they already know what it is. When it's not in quotations age appropriate, but they're familiar with it. So I feel like, in my perspective, if you're gonna be familiar with something either way, I feel like it's better to have something of more understanding, in my perspective,
Yeah, that's a
right?
good point.
If we were to look at, let's say, back in the like 90s or 80s, where women weren't meant to be workers or women weren't meant to be put in this position, and they were open to these books where like, oh, women became like a pilot, women became that I feel like is part of the initiation of why women are managers or pilots today. It was something that they were familiarized, or you're gonna get to familiarize, either or. But I feel like just having an understanding of it more fully opens the child's mind into creating like better possibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the texts that relates to my point of view is that there are still some issues that haven't been solved when it comes to, and it comes back, tend to repeat, like racism, which has happened a long time ago, but it's still continuing on today. Maybe not that constant, maybe not a lot like it used to back then, but it's still like there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like throughout history, most of these decisions haven't been fully open to literature, where literature has become something that has been less and less supportive. So throughout the years, like in my experience, books weren't really like pushed upon me throughout like my ages. Like it was like in elementary, you were like, oh, you have to read 30 minutes, right? Middle school, like you have to read. High school and like college, it isn't like, oh, you have to read. It's really rare. Like if you ask a college student, hey, like what books are you reading? Or like what book are you getting familiar with? It's really hard unless, let's say, they have a course with that.
Oh yeah, I agree. Because we're super busy doing work and we're really only reading the books if we have an assignment. But I mean, it depends. I myself like to read, and my favorite genre is nonfiction. So yeah,
Yeah, me
whatever
too.
that's worth. Yeah, take it.
Yeah.
Let's.
I thought you brought up some good points earlier, Johanna, that the world has changed or is changing, and with the rise of, social media and, TikTok, Instagram, that kids are getting this information from those apps, and how this book would be a better way of explaining these problems that we have now. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with this, but yeah, that's what I was. That's what I think. But we
Yeah,
kind
can
of
I add
are.
something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I heard how you mentioned that it speaks to modern issues. You know how Children of Blood and Bone talks about modern issues. How it's an
Hmm.
allegory for police brutality and racism and stuff. That very much reminds me of what was it, A Little Princess?
Uh-huh.
Where
Yeah.
yeah, because that book, I mean, it's still good children's literature. But the thing that really strikes me about it is that it spoke about issues back in the day, back in the 1800s in England. You know how the girl she had to go to the school and she was berated by this very mean headmistress, Miss Minchin, and she had to use her imagination and friendship with other students so that she could cope with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is that back then people were forced to grow up faster, and that's why you saw her as a mother figure to who was it? Lottie. Like there was this girl Lottie, and the girl, what was her name again? Do any of you know?
Who's?
I'm not good with names.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the protagonist, she became a mother figure to Lottie, which was another student at the boarding school, and I guess that kind of also reflects how children were forced to grow up back then. They were forced to grow up faster, and that is how that book is in a way related to Children of Blood and Bone because both of them speak to issues of their day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you brought that book up because I was gonna use it as a source, right?
Hmm.
Where to me that book also like in a way like allows children to learn and express their feelings and emotions, right? And when it comes to children's literature, my main points are just allowing them to have a broad thought about a situation and allowing them to express their feelings. Because most of these books, let's say like kindergarten books or like, let's say like baby books, they bring
Hmm.
out like this sense of like happy color when it comes to like what you said, vocabulary,
Yeah.
illustration, all of these things, right? But also when we think about like you said, oh, back then people had to grow up fast, right? When we
Hmm.
see the concept that it was an issue in the old age to grow up fast, we can still see that today. So it's something that hasn't stopped. It's something that still kind of continues, you know?
It just manifests in a different way.
Yeah, basically.
Hmm. That's a good description.
Okay, so it sounds like we already kind of covered on how this text is relevant to the modern child or today's children. So the next question is, do you think that this book should be banned throughout the US? What do you guys think? I don't think it should be banned.
Hmm.
I don't think it should be banned either because, in my opinion, right, if we're open to
Hmm.
other things that aren't necessarily like helping, right, mentally
Hmm.
or physically or sentimentally, we're open to these things, right, that impact us in a negative way. Why not allow these things that have an impact for the greater good to be in the US, right? That's my opinion.
Hmm. I have one as well. Earlier in this course, in this class, we actually went over something, and what I'm referring to is need for counter narratives because we have something called dominant narratives and counter narratives. Dominant narratives are the ones that promote it; they're put at the very top, and they're the ones that are sold to us as like correct or the ones you ought to follow. We don't get other people's side of the story, and Children of Blood and Bone is a counter narrative because it gives us the perspective of like blacks and females at the same time, and also class, like what lower class because they had their magic taken away by the antagonists, the bad guys, and we're supposed to be getting their side of the story as well
Mm-hmm.
because it all relates back to the concept of social justice.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Agreeing to that, I totally agree, right? Because, like you said, we're only getting one part of the story. But if we really look at the fact that there are a lot of books, right, throughout history of like white men, right, like the professor said, there are a lot of these books that were published earlier or that were mostly published because of the gender, because of the race, right? But when we
Hmm.
look at like focusing on how the person views the book compared to how the person that published the book viewed it, right? So kind of like to my perspective, I believe that these books teach in one way or another without fully affecting or reflecting like its ends. So let's say the three of us read the book, right? Each one of us is gonna take out its own point of view towards the book. It's gonna have a positive effect and a negative effect. Either or, it still has a reflect on us, right?
Hmm.
But to me, I feel like today it allows children to create scenarios or initiations of certain things with these issues.
Okay.
Okay.
For the last question, guys, would you recommend this book to children or adults to read? And if so, why or why not?
I would, right? I would recommend this book to children and adults just because it's a more open book to where everyone's point of view, whether you are more realistic or into fantasy, or certain topics of the book are more broad, in which everyone has their own point of learning something in their own way. I really like the intake on the book, and it really targets issues that we're having today for young adults. It could be something that they want to fix or initiate to fix in the future for references. I like that it has like statements which you can agree and disagree on, and it's just a very open book to, I feel like, most ages. And one of the quotes that I really liked was, when your opponent has no honor, you must fight in different ways, smarter ways. I like this quote because it allows you to think that, hey, you're not always gonna fight your fights with your fist in a way. So I feel like throughout, like you said, like throughout the issues that we've been having over time, people started with like, hey, speaking up, people started initiating things, and I feel like this book just supports that in like many different ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. This can be a conversation starter, and you can see what people think and what people's point of views are, because, obviously people aren't going to think the same, and, this is a great way to see what other people are thinking. William, I know you said earlier on that you don't think that this is considered children literature, and so I'm curious to think
Yeah.
why, or I mean, not why, would you recommend this knowing that you don't consider this children's literature?
So would I recommend the text to
Children
this
or,
text for
yeah, just
children
to
of blood and
children.
bone?
Yeah,
Would I recommend it to children?
yeah.
I don't think I would because of the content matter. I mean, it is pretty violent.
Hmm.
It's pretty complex. I mean, children don't really understand the issues being presented at hand. I've heard your arguments; they're pretty good, but I am of the opinion that this book is that doesn't qualify as children's literature because of how it tackles the issues of like social justice, and it has a lot of violence, which is normally forbidden or at least considered taboo in children's literature. Like that's what I believe. So I wouldn't recommend it to them. And also, there's this other quote that I want to bring up
Hmm.
that is relevant to our discussion. We already talked about how there's like a lot of violence and a lot of complex themes about oppression and social justice, which children cannot understand. But there is something else. There's parent and child conflict, and that's pretty traumatic to a child. I mean, it's really sad to them. And where is it? Let me see here. It's on chapter 66, and it has chapter 66 of Children of Blood and Bone. That's pages 431 to 133, and it involves Inan confronting his father. Like it's a very climatic scene. And let's see here. It says this: I opened the door and pushed my magic down, stepping into the commander quarters that father's commandeered. He stands in his velvet night robe, scanning a faded map. No sign of hatred, not even a hint of disgust. Him carving maggot into a girl's back is just another day's work. He wanted to see me. Father chooses not to answer for a long moment. He picks up the map and holds it to the light. A red X marks the Diviner Valley. In that instant, it hits me. Zuleika's death. Zayle's screams. They don't mean a thing to him because they're Magi. They're nothing. He preaches duty before self. His Orisha doesn't include them. He never has. He doesn't just want to erase magic. He wants to erase them. You disgraced me, he finally speaks. There's no way to conduct yourself during an interrogation. I wouldn't call that an interrogation. Father sets the map down. Excuse me? Nothing. That's what he expects me to say. But Zeli sobs and shakes in the corners of my mind. I won't call torture by another name. I didn't learn anything of use, father. Did you? My voice crescendos. The only information I received was how loud you can make a girl scream. To my surprise, my father smiles. But his smile is more dangerous than his fury. Your travels have fortified you, he nods. Good, but do not waste your energy defending that, maggot. So I'm gonna cut the quote right there. But basically, after that, Inan he contemplates. He thinks about how his own father called him that slur, that word, maggot, like for someone with magic, and it really did hurt him. And I guess you wouldn't expect it to see in children's literature. In children's literature, you expect to see happy parent-child relationships. Sometimes not, like the abusive what was it, like the evil stepmother in Cinderella or something like that. But most of the time, you do see happy parent and child relationships, but not here. So that's why I would not recommend it to children. That's pretty traumatic and
Yeah,
dark.
but yeah, you said you wouldn't recommend it to children. How about adults?
Adults, I would, because they can understand it. They know the complexities of issues of social justice. They can handle the violence, and they can actually learn from this as well. Even though this is targeted towards younger people, like young adults, I would also recommend it to grown people. And there's also, but as we're talking about the concept of children's literature, there's this quote by C.S. Lewis that I really like. I take it to heart. He said he's a guy who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, but he did say that children's books that can only be enjoyed by children are not good, which means that adults must also be able to enjoy them and like understand and get a lesson out of them. I really like that. That's actually his story. He used to feel ashamed for reading fairy tales and fantasy books and all that, but then he didn't because he liked their content, and that's what motivated him to say that quote. And I very much agree with him.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's all the questions that I have or are posted. So thank you guys for your opinions and your comments on this book. And thank you, Miss, for the class. And have a good summer, guys.
Right.
Thank you very much, Professor,
Well,
Yeah, thank you. Bye,
and
guys.
bye.
Okay.
Have a good